Welcome back to another episode of NUS College Conversations. I'm your host, Elliot, and in today's episode, we'll be talking about Malay Christians in Malaysia. Malay Christians in Malaysia face an inherent plight. Their ethnic identity and their religious identity are so intricately intertwined that they can't seem to separate them. If you're born a Malay Muslim and you want to convert to Christianity, well, there are serious repercussions that you face, especially because Christianity is viewed as an opposing religion to Islam. And this is even encoded in the law. According to Malaysian law, if you are born a Malay, what it really means is that you are born a Muslim. To be Malay is to be Muslim. So we see a deep connection between ethnic identity and religious identity. And today on our show, to help enlighten us a little bit about the plight these people face and some factors to consider, we have two esteemed professors.
Hello, I'm Professor Shad El-Shamari, Professor of English Language and Literature, and also an author.
Hello, I'm Chandran Kukathas. I'm a Professor of Political Science at the Singapore Management University.
Good evening and welcome to today's discussion. We're examining the experience of Christian Malays in Malaysia, a group trapped between religion, law, and ethnicity. And joining us are Professor El-Shamari and Professor Kukathas. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you, I'm glad to be here.
Let's begin with the basic issue. In Malaysia, to be Malay is by definition to be Muslim. So if an ethnic Malay embraces Christianity, they risk losing not only their religion, but also their ethnic and legal identity. Professor El-Shamari, how does this situation speak to your work about identity and hybridity?
Well, it's a very powerful and tragic example. In my research, particularly analyzing post-colonial identities, I argue that striving for a so-called pure identity, whether religious, ethnic, or cultural, is illusory and dangerous. For Malay Christians, this state demands purity. To be Malay is to be Muslim. Full stop. But any deviation is treated not as an individual choice, but betrayal. This reflects the dangers that I write about. Even when hybridity is suppressed, it produces alienation, conflict, even fanaticism.
Professor Kukathas, you approach this from a political philosophy angle. How do you frame the tension?
Fundamentally, the problem is a conflict between freedom of conscience and authority of culture. This particular issue is quite fascinating to me. I was born in Kuala Lumpur. Some of my work, I question whether cultural rights, the right of a group to preserve its culture, can ever justify denying individual liberty. In Malaysia's case, the culture claims to maintain its religious identity, but at the cost of the individual Malays' rights to live their own faith. I argue that if a society values freedom, it must permit individuals to leave their cultural groups, even if that threatens cultural unity.
But defenders of the current system argue that the Malay-Muslim system must be protected for national cohesion. Professor El-Shamari, how would you respond?
Well, I would say that this demand for cohesion is precisely the mechanism of oppression. When a state or society insists that one identity or narrative must be maintained at all costs, it crushes the multiplicity within its people. Hybridity, difference, internal contradictions, these are natural. Denying them leads to what I describe as a muscular rigidity of identity, a kind of lockjaw to draw from Fanon. It not only harms individuals like Malay Christians, but destabilizes society by forcing people into masks that don't quite fit.
Yes, Elshamari, if I may add, societies that suppress dissent in the name of unity are often weaker, not stronger. They fear the natural processes of change. The strength of a culture should not be measured by how effectively it imprisons its members, but by how well it adapts when members think and live freely.
Well, both of you highlight the violence, whether symbolic or literal, that enforced purity creates. But some might argue, isn't it the right of a culture to defend itself from fragmentation? What about group survival?
The right to self preserve cannot be absolute. If group survival means obliterating the autonomy of individuals, then it is no longer a free culture. It becomes a prison. Individuals should be able to leave, dissent, reinterpret. A truly free society respects exit rights, otherwise, it is merely authoritarian.
Exactly. And we must remember that cultures are not static identities handed down intact from heaven. They're living, shifting, hybrid connections. The Malay identity today is itself a colonial and post colonial product, a fusion of traditions, laws, influences. Claiming it must be religiously pure is historically false and deeply violent to its real people's lives.
Well, let's bring it back to lived experience. Christian Malays in Malaysia face legal penalties, social exclusion, and even threats to their safety. How do your theories suggest real world solutions or ways forward?
I think the primary solution is structural. I think that there must be a separation of ethnic identity from religion in law. If being Malay did not legally require being Muslim, individuals would have space to redefine themselves. Freedom of religion must include freedom to live without losing one's legal standing as a citizen or ethnic being.
And on the cultural side, education must challenge the myth of pure identity. We need narratives in schools, media, arts, the film industry, that being Malay can mean many things, including being Christian. Otherwise, we condemn generations to the tragic polarization that we see here today.
All right, final question. Are you guys optimistic that changes like that could really happen in Malaysia or globally?
I'm cautious. Institutions built on controlling identity do not surrender easily. But history shows us that human beings, in the long run, crave freedom more than enforced sameness. I remain hopeful.
I believe in the resilience of individuals. Even when systems are rigid, people find ways to live a complex hybrid lives. Change will be slow and will require confronting deep fears about belonging and purity.
Thank you both so much for your powerful insights. The struggle of Christian Malays is one example of a larger global challenge, the tension between cultural belonging and personal freedom. May we continue seeking ways to honor both. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'll see you all next time on NUSC Conversations.